Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Readings from Oconomowaukee series with Books and Company and Boswell. I'm Daniel Goldin from Boswell. This is a recording, so you can't ask questions. But maybe if you email me, I'll email the publicist who emailed the author who email, and then in about 3 or 4 weeks, you should probably get your answer. Or you could probably contact her through social media. Anyway, let me introduce Lisa Baudoin from Books and Company, who's going to introduce our author today.
Hi, thank you, Daniel. Monica Wood is the author of One in a Million Boy and the memoir When We Were the Kennedys, among other novels and plays. Her new novel, How to Read a Book, was a May Indie Next pick. She lives in Portland, Maine with her husband and their cat, Susie. Welcome, Monica.
You notice how Susie got her name in there and Dan did not?
Well, you know what? I didn't want to give Dan's name. I was respecting his privacy.
We're an open book around here.
Her husband, Dan.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm just so thrilled. I'm coming to you on a sweltering day in Maine. I live in Portland, Maine, and we are just being blindsided by this crazy heat, as you probably are in the Midwest as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm in my backyard studio that Dan built for me, and it's my little oasis. He says that the welcome mat out front here is some kind of truth in advertising violation, because even the cat is not allowed in here. So it's small. It's like about 12 by 10, but I have all my favorite books in here, and this is where I have a phone and heat and all that for the winter time, but the phone is always turned off in here. And in fact, let me make sure it is turned off.
Well, it looks like the perfect accessory dwelling unit. Is that what those are called? And I think it's ironic that your cat isn't allowed in, and there's some cute cats in the background.
I know.
I love
I do like cats.
And I see a beautiful cat painting. And
yes,
before you start talking about your book, because I'll forget later and it won't be in context. If you haven't read the new book, Catland, about Louis Wayne, the cat artist, I highly recommend it. It is a beautiful book, and it's really fascinating story of the history of cat culture.
Really? Well, thank you for that. I wish I were with you. I'd walk right into your store and get it right now.
Well, you have 5,000
miles away, so no.
Yeah, you have 5 independent bookstores in Portland, so I think
we have. This is probably not the discussion. I mean, we'll get to the book eventually, but do you know we have 7? Well, for indie bookstores, we now have 6. Portland, Maine has 65,000 people. Greater Portland is probably 150,000, and we have 6 independent bookstores. And they're all doing fine. So I'm very, very proud of that.
Yeah, you're killing us. So.
Yeah, we are. The only other place I've ever known of that's that bookstore rich was the Bay Area in San Francisco, but that was a while ago when I was out there, and I don't know if it's still like that, but it's
the real estate. It's too expensive. I think.
Yeah,
but you can go to like Hay and Y and stuff like that. They're all secondhand, but still. Lisa, would you like to ask?
Yes. Do you want to give us a little, elevator pitch or boat pitch?
Yes. Okay. It's funny. I don't even have a copy of the book here, but anyway, it has I love this cover. Okay, so that cover of all my books, look at that. It looks like it's a little bookstore. That is catnip to people who love books. I love that cover so much. And usually I don't love my covers, but this one I really, really love. So you follow 3 characters through the book. The first character is Violet Powell. She's a 22-year-old from a little town in Maine called Abbott Falls. And she is just finishing up a 2-year prison sentence for a car accident, a drunk driving accident in which she killed a kindergarten teacher. And she is about to be unceremoniously dumped in Portland, Maine, where she knows nobody because her family has they just want nothing to do with her. The other character is a retired English teacher named Harriet Larson. She is, retirement isn't settling too well with her. She's about to have an empty nest. And she is volunteering at the prison where Violet is an inmate as the book club lady. They call her the bookie, the book lady. And that's how she knows Violet. And the third character that you follow through is Frank Daigle, who is a retired machinist, and he is an extremely overqualified handyman at a independent bookstore in Portland, Maine, which is modeled after Longfellow Books, which is my home-based bookstore. So the three of them, shortly after Violet is finishing her sentence and has been released, the three of them meet in the bookstore. Frank's at work. Harriet is ordering books for her next selection for the ladies. And Violet is completely at sea. And the only thing she can think of to do is go to this bookstore and buy the book she was reading when she got released so she can find out how it ends. And the three of them meet in the bookstore and their lives begin to intersect in ways that then fuel the plot of the book.
Yeah. And it's quite a setup too.
Yeah.
And the bookstore is also a cat adoption space.
It is. They adopt cats, which Longfellow Books does as well. They always have a cat. Well, they have it for actually a couple of years now, but yeah, they have a big cage. And Frank is also in charge of the cats that are up for adoption.
We are often asked why we don't have a cat, and I'm allergic. There is another Boswell's books in Sherborne Falls, Massachusetts. And we always say we're named after the author. They actually named the story after the cat.
That's so great. I love it.
And that's their logo. So
I love it.
So yeah, the bookstore cat is seems to be a very
it is. It's one of the things I love the most about going to bookstores, here and there across the country, is there's almost always a cat. And cats, I don't know what it is. Cats and writers, they just go together. There's so many writers who were cat people. Mark Twain was a famous cat lover. It's neat.
Your book is not just about cats, it turns out.
No, it's not really about cats at all.
One of my very, very favorite kind of stories, which is a found family. I wonder if you would talk about the importance of found family and community in this book and in other books.
Yeah, I would say that is a big theme across all of my novels, is that human desire to make family out of spare parts or broken parts or whatever. If you don't have it, you find it. As a Homo sapiens, we are programmed to find a tribe. It's in our DNA. And I love writing about people who are kind of at sea, and the instinct that takes over is I need to find a connection with somebody. So this one is very similar. Violet has nobody, and she kind of gloms onto Harriet, who is more than happy to, because her last kid is out of the house, just about to go out of the house. And Frank, I should add, by the way, which I didn't, that Frank is the widower of the person that Violet killed. And another big theme in this book is forgiveness. Not only forgiveness of others, but mostly forgiveness of ourselves. And that's a lot harder. When I go on the road and I talk about the forgiveness aspect of the book, I will say, I feel like it's a human tick that we're so often willing to give others the grace of forgiveness, and so often not willing to give ourselves that same grace for something we've done that we're ashamed of, or something that we did that we think is not forgivable. That the same thing in someone else, we are willing to offer that forgiveness. So that's something that Violet is struggling with. Of course, she did something absolutely awful. She took a life. And Frank, on the other hand, is, in fact, he has a line in there that I really like. And it's something about, she says, I can accept your apology, but there's this little scene happening. And she says, but I honestly don't know how to accept your forgiveness. And he says, well, as I understand it, forgiveness flows only one way. And he's correct. The forgivee doesn't have to do anything. It's just the forgiver is the one who confers the forgiveness. And that's it. It does go only one way. It doesn't matter if the person thinks they deserve the forgiveness or it's not theirs to say. It's the forgiver who confers that grace upon somebody.
And you plant so many little gems like that throughout the entire book. It is so perfect for discussion. And both Daniel and I had read it earlier, and we kind of reread and looked through, before. And it's like you really pick them up again, and you want to talk about them more. And we had a lively discussion before you came on, just reviewing. And so, what is the origin of the base of the story? Because the meeting and their situation really gives you an opportunity to plant this kind of wisdom throughout the story. So what was the origin?
You mean of the prison book club?
Of the prison book club, and also just the three of them meeting.
You've been working on this book a long time, we got the feeling. And what was the spark to read?
You got the feeling I've been working on this book for a long time?
Have you? Or
this book, okay, I'll just tell you. It usually takes me 4 years to write a novel. And this one took exactly two years, which is like turbo speed for me. I'm really a slow writer. And as a result, I think part of it is I wrote a lot of it during COVID, and there was nothing else to do, obviously. But the other thing is this book kind of came to me in a way none of my other books have. And it came to me in a way that I think people who don't write novels think novels come to novelists, which is a bolt from the blue in the middle of the night. And that's exactly what happened with this. Usually I just start with just a little notion, a person with a problem. And then I just follow the language into whatever the story might reveal. But this time I was woken in the middle of the night with this monologue going on. I could hear this. I knew it was a fictional character in my head trying to be born. And at the time I was writing plays and really enjoying the collaboration, as plays are just so much fun, so much more fun than writing a novel. And I remember saying to this little character, I'm a playwright now, go find somebody else. And she didn't. She woke me up the next night as well. And I'll never forget, it was a hot like this. And it was middle of the night, like 3:30. And again, I said, I live in Portland, Maine. So I come down my little stairs, and it was a hot night. So it was just the screen door open, and I have a street light right in front. So there was enough light coming in that I could see. I grabbed a notebook and I just wrote down what Violet was saying. And that became the first chapter of this book eventually. But at the time I thought, okay, I got that out of my system. I'll put it away, maybe I'll use it for something sometime, but otherwise I had zero interest in spending the next 4 years of my one wild and precious life writing another novel. So the next night I thought, that's great. I wake up in the middle of the night and Harriet is speaking to me. It was crazy. I mean, this had never happened to me before. Same thing, grab the notebook, go downstairs. This was less coherent. I wasn't quite sure. Her name was Shirley, actually, at that time. And I just, wrote for a little while. And then that was it. It seemed to be, okay, I just, whatever that was, I shook it out and it was gone. And about 2 months later, I was so curious about what connected these two women so I started writing this novel. That is how it began. And Violet's voice stayed in that very strong, she has a very strong voice, first person. And the other two characters, Frank and Harriet, are in the third person, their point of view, but in the third person. And you don't realize for a very long time why Violet is speaking in the first person and the others are rendered in third person. So we won't say anything else about that. Yeah, so that's how it came to me, which is not, I know, Lisa, that's not the question you asked me, and now I can't remember
that is the question I asked you.
It is?
No, that is the question, because you could tell there was something, some spark, some origin that made this story come together.
How could you tell that? That's so interesting.
I don't know, because I wrote down, I want to know the origin of this. There
Huh.
had to be something that, because I don't know, it has a strength and a wisdom that
Oh,
comes from that.
oh, thank you. Well, I am old now, so wisdom does come with age.
Okay.
I wish I had that
Did
wisdom.
you base the prison book club on any research, anything?
I did a lot of research for this book. All of it was really fun, but the prison part is something I had done. It wasn't research. I'd done that about 9 years ago now, and I did it for 3 years. I had a group. It wasn't a book club. It was more like a reading writing club, and it was called Meet the Authors. Oh my God, there's a huge bug on my. Just 1 second. I'm sorry. I got to get this out of here. Okay, goodbye. Yep. Yes, thank you. Okay, good. You go on. There you go. All right. Sorry. I just escorted a bug the size of a hamster outside. Okay.
Seems appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah. Where was I?
Prison,
yeah.
the writing group.
The writing. So it was like a reading writing group. I called it Meet the Authors because all main authors know each other well. And so I thought I'm going to do it like a 12-week program. And we're going to read 4 books. One was, believe it or not, like science book, like lay science. The other was a book of poems, a children's book, and a book of personal essays. I decided not to do novels because they're just so long, and I liked the other things better. And so what we would do is we'd spend a couple of weeks discussing the book on hand. And then I would invite the author, who of course was a friend of mine. I invite each author in to spend 1 session with the women. And then they would give the women a writing assignment in that same genre that they'd been reading. And then we talk about that. It was so fun. And they were just such delightful people, a very wide range of experience and education. And but it all just kind of worked. And the women in the book are not based on the women that were in my classes. And in fact, I made sure of that. But the feeling that I had when I was in there, the feeling of camaraderie, and we used to do this thing, we called it the bubble. And so we'd all get in there. There were 13 of us, including me. And we'd say, okay, time to bubble up. And we'd put this like fake like bubble around us. And inside that, all we were was readers and writers. That's it, nothing else. We weren't anything else except readers and writers. And once in a while, like a couple of times during, it was 2 hours. So I say, okay, we gotta bubble up again. And we would just they did it. I mean, it was a really great experience. And how I got into it was the Maine Humanities Council had done a one-off book club in this same prison. And they had used an earlier book of mine called Ernie's Ark. And whoever was running it found me on the internet and said, I think you're in Portland, Maine. Can you come and just for 1 session, just come and meet the women and talk about your book? I said, I would love to do that. I thought it would be so interesting, and which it was. And so I got there, we had one unbelievable discussion. I mean, the insights were stunning. And I remember coming home and I said to my husband, I have got to get back there. I've got to get back there. I was just determined by hook or by crook. Well, not by crook, by hook. I was going to get back there. And so I wrote up this, sample syllabus thing. It was very organized, but I didn't really know what I was doing. And I just walked down to the Humanities Council office, which is like a half a mile from my house. And I said, can you give me some money to buy, these hardcover books that I wanted to, because I thought it was really important for the women to have the book. And it turned out it was very important for the women to have the book and to have it signed by the author that came in. It was really so touching to me how much they appreciated having a signed book by an author. It was surprising and really moving. So that's where that came from. And then the other thing, there's, I guess it's okay to say what Violet gets for a job because it happens a little later.
Oh,
Yeah.
I would say that
But yeah,
we give it, when we're talking about the book, we
yeah. So
it's important.
Violet, I always put my characters to work at real jobs, and I like showing my characters at work. I don't like, I mean, sometimes you don't need to know exactly, but there's a lot of books where all the drama and everything is happening, and they like go to work in an architect's office or something, and you never see them. It's sort of like the old sitcoms, you know, from the 60s of dad goes to the insurance company and with his briefcase, but you never see anybody actually working at these jobs. So I love putting my characters to work. And the kind of research I like to do the most is just chatting with people about what they do, because people love talking about what they do. So, but this job that I gave to Violet, I have wanted to put this job in a book for decades, and I finally found the right book for it. So she is working in a research lab run by a behavioral scientist who is doing avian cognition studies with African gray parrots, which is a thing. It's an amazing thing. And the research is almost all the American research is by this one woman named Dr. Irene Pepperberg. She is currently at BU, I think, but when I went to visit her parrots, she was at Harvard. And it was December of, it was just before Christmas, December 2019, 2020, sorry. And you know what happened right after that. So I'm thinking if I'd waited like 2 more months, I never would have gotten to meet these birds. But I did meet the birds. They are highly intelligent. They're doing amazing things. Nothing in the book, people are going to think, oh, she totally made that up. I did not make anything up. And also, writing dialogue for parrots is probably the most fun I've ever had writing. It's so fun. But these parrots they can tell you quantities, they can tell you materials, they can tell you colors, they can tell you shapes, they can tell you objects. They can, just as a one way to explain how intelligent these parrots are. This was probably kind of a publicity stunt or something, but she brought in some Harvard freshmen who were going to go head to head with Griffin, who is the really smart one. Athena is the other one, and she's a little young to be doing a lot of this. She's only like 9, but Griffin is in his mid-20s, so he knows a lot. And so he went head to head with these Harvard students on the old boardwalk game where you hide something under a shell and then move them around and you're following the object, except there were 4 objects. It was pom-poms of different colors. So a white, red, green, yellow pom-pom. So you show the bird the pom-poms and the students, and you say, okay, this is white, da, 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 da. And then you cover them up and you say, where is white? And Griffin will peck the one that has the white under it. And then you say, where is red? And he'll peck the one that has red under it. And then you switch it once and you say, where is green? And so he's looking at 4 colors. I mean, this is really higher level organizational executive function thinking. And the long story short, this bird kicked the asses of these Harvard freshmen in this shell game. Was it really, he's quite smart. And I got to meet him, which was really, really fun. And the other thing I did for research was for Frank, who is a retired machinist. My father-in-law was a machinist, and my husband worked with him as a younger man as a machinist. But my husband now teaches at the local technical school, and he hooked me up with the machine tool people there. And so I went once a week. I didn't go to every class. I went to 1 class a week for a semester and learned how to use, the milling machine and the lathe and, all these different cutting tools and these measuring tools. I just learned the very, very basics of machining. And it was me and 12 19-year-old boys, and we had a great time. So that's the kind of research I do, it's just fun.
It is really fun. That is really fun.
it's not like being in dusty archives looking at what happened in World War I. You know, it's just really fun stuff that gets you out of the house and you're learning things, and it's fun.
So you say that you knew this was the right job for this book. You want to talk a little bit about that? Because Daniel and I were talking earlier about, you know, how the parents came into this particular story. And I was thinking, you know, is there a similarity with looking at how things are held captive, are in captivity?
You know, isn't it funny? Because, you know, sometimes the readers tell you what your themes are. And I have heard that, but it didn't even occur to me when I was writing it that everyone is in a cage of sorts, you know, in the book. The characters are all in a cage of sorts. And there is one section where Violet feels, I didn't realize until much later why Violet feels so much empathy with these birds. Well, of course, I even have a book in there. They're reading, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and I'm still not getting it, you know. Clearly it's, you know, it's there and it's fully formed somewhere in my subconscious, but I'm like, you know, how many hints does my subconscious need to give me? But I came to that realization dismayingly late, is all I'll say.
Oh, wait a minute. I just want to say, you put I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings in the book without seeing the connection?
Yeah.
I love that. I love that.
Me too.
Yeah. I mean, I knew the connection with the women in the prison, you know, that work, but I'm thinking, not thinking, well, you know, I actually also have caged birds in this book. No, just boom. But, you know, you only write one sentence at a time, and you're not thinking thematically as you're writing. And so many times the themes, you know, your readers tell you what your themes are, which is wonderful. It's so much fun when that happens. But anyway, so I do see that, you know, clearly there is the idea of captivity. And it was something I was super duper aware of when I was doing my prison group, and Harriet has that feeling like she wants to let in, I think she calls it the fresh air of literature or something, and the idea that you can imprison a body but not a mind. And that in a book you can go anywhere. And so it's I don't know, it's you know, all of that, it was in there obviously because my own experience with that was so profound. But I, you know, it wasn't like I thought, oh gee, I'm gonna write a character that's doing this. It didn't occur to me at all, and I've never written about it in any other way. But it felt, you know, I don't know. That's just how Violet came. I knew she was in a prison. So
I loved the subconsciousness of the themes coming forward, and just how our brains hold in all of the past knowledge of reading a book and the stories that we've told and the things that we've observed. And then they just come out without us having been, they're the texture, the thread of our lives.
Yeah.
I was saying this could also be called Why to Read a Book instead of How to Read a Book.
Yeah.
Because there's so many reasons why we should be reading more.
Mm-hmm. That's not the real title, by the way. That's not the title of the book. I mean, it is, but the real title is Meanwhile. That's my title.
That's it. We actually caught that because it's still listed in your biography for one of your older books.
I bet it is. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was the original. That was the title for forever.
Yeah.
Until we were almost there. And my lovely editor said, you know, sales and marketing is wondering about the title. I'm like, okay, here we go. Because the same thing happened with the 1 in a Million Boy. That was also not my title. But I've learned over the years to listen to sales and marketing. They know what they're doing in that arena, and I don't. So at this point, I'm like, oh, that's fine. I don't mind. So, and I've gotten used, and it is a very good title for the book. It's appropriate. I just think I don't love it, but it's fine.
Would you like to talk a little about the story and the meanwhile? Because Lisa and I already had a vibrant conversation about what's the story and what's the meanwhile, and it seems like an important part of the book, but maybe needs more explanation for what you were trying to get at.
Well, Harriet, she's an inveterate teacher. She's often in teacher mode. And so when they're talking about books, she teaches them things about structure. And there's even a piece like they're in the first chapter, Violet's talking about this book they all hate called Scar Tissue. It's this fake memoir that I made that one up.
I looked for it, couldn't find it.
Yeah, no, it's not real. And she says, the line is something like, so they hate everything about this cardiac surgeon who grew up in a junky East Texas somewhere and grew up to be this famous cardiac surgeon, and they're just not buying it. They don't believe anything in this memoir. And they're saying, she grew up eating dirt. And so they're like, nobody grows up eating dirt and gets flawless twins who deserve a $40,000 preschool. They're just like, they love judging the characters. And so I love doing that. That was really fun to like really trash a book that doesn't exist, but has elements of books that maybe I've hated. I won't say what, but yeah. Anyway, so where was I?
I won't say either.
Yeah. You might have been able to figure it out, but anyway, yeah. Where were we?
Oh, the story and the meanwhile.
Oh, the story and
the story in the meanwhile.
Yes. So probably I should read that part, but I can't find it right now. I don't even have a copy of the book with me. So she's talking about how stories like life, there's like a story going on, but there's always a meanwhile where there's something else going on that's really important that you don't maybe see. And for example, she'll say, three bears go for a walk, story. Goldilocks breaks into the house, meanwhile. So there's this important thing happening while the story appears to be just kind of rolling along. And the interesting thing that she does with the women in the group is she says, you can always decide what is your story and what is your meanwhile. In other words, is prison your story or is it your meanwhile? Is it the thing that's happening while your real life, maybe your intellectual life, maybe something happening on the outside, maybe we don't know. So she just asks them to think of their lives in terms of story structure, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And then later, Violet tries to explain this to somebody. I'm not going to say who it is, hoping that Violet, will be that person's story and not their meanwhile. So it kind of threads through the book, and then in the end is a big one.
Yeah.
And because the way it wraps up is nice. And I guess we can't talk about that, but
no.
Do you want to talk a little about so there's a lot of in addition to Scar Tissue, the fake memoir, there's a lot of real books in the book too.
Right.
But it felt to Lisa and I, just because we weren't as familiar with it, even though having had a very long career in bookselling, we used to sell a lot of it. Could you talk about the importance of Spoon River Anthology in the book?
So Spoon River Anthology, it was written in, I think it was published in 1915. I remember reading it in high school. And some people call it a book of poetry. Some people call it stories, but they're basically one-page epitaphs spoken by the dead in this fictional Illinois cemetery. So they tell you, they don't tell you their life story. They usually say, they zero in on one event. And sometimes the events, like somebody telling one story, 5 pages later, a person mentioned in that story tells another story. So there's little crisscrosses as well. So the denizens of this cemetery, some of them know each other, and they're all speaking this as Violet sees it. They're all speaking the story that kind of emblemizes their existence. So not necessarily, I got married and had 7 children and 3 of them died, and it's not biographies. They're more, how would you want to be remembered? What is the important thing you want some live person strolling by to know about you? And it's not as if these things are literally written on their tombstones. It's just like they're coming out and saying, almost as if they're rising up from the grave to say, listen, passerby, it says born, died. This is this is the thing that is the essence of me. And I've always loved that book. It is a whole weird part at the end, but the epitaphs themselves, they're so moving and so simple and genuine. And I have heard that a lot of book groups who are using How to Read a Book as their book also get a copy of Spoon River Anthology so they can see what the references are. Yeah. So Harriet has them read that, and it's a big hit. And but not as big a hit as Yeats. They love Yeats, which is kind of neat because I love Yeats, so they have to love Yeats. I never actually used Yeats with my students in the prison, but I think they would have loved it.
So you actually, we're going to say we're going to ask you to recommend books, but this book, in a lot of ways, is a book of book recommendations as well.
It is. Also, I think there's something else really kind of sweet about the fact that, and this comes from the women really liked talking. They didn't talk about the now. They loved talking about before. So any before things, when their kids were born, they were all mothers. When their kids were little, or in their own childhood, or so they like talking about before things. And so I use that in the sense of the books that they liked the best were the books they'd already read in high school. And so those are things like The Great Gatsby, Catcher in the Rye, Ethan Frome, and there's actually a funny passage about I think it must be Donna Lynn who says this, one of the inmates. They read Ethan Frome, and Violet says it's basically about how life sucks and nobody who deserves love ever gets it. And then Donna Lynn says, yeah, the author should have called it Ethan Frome, God Hates Your Guts. And so, but they love, complaining about these books, but the ones from before are the ones that seem to catch them the most. Yeah.
I really appreciated the reading when you took them from reading them by themselves to reading aloud, when it was right, I think when poetry started and when Spoon River Anthology. How was that? I mean, and hearing and speaking at the same time of a piece of work is very different than having it just in your head. How did you make that transition?
I actually did that in my own group. We used to do, I call them choral readings, mostly with poetry. But I remember one time they agreed to do a performance for the other people in the prison. And we did a version of Robert Frost's Fire and Ice. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that ice is also great and would suffice. And we did this with different voices, like single voices, double voices, the whole choral voice. It was amazing. I mean, pin drop silence. It was so cool. So I thought, oh no, I have to have the women in this book doing the same thing, like reading aloud and taking parts. And, and the shy ones are just the audience. They don't want to speak. And then there's some who, were destined for Broadway and took a very wrong turn somewhere. So I just kind of use that.
Do you read aloud in your studio or when you're reading, writing?
I do. Yeah. In fact, the cat you saw at the beginning, the picture of that cat, that's the one cat I ever had who would stay awake for an entire manuscript. Mostly they just fall asleep, but that was Jack. And he would listen to, as long as I was speaking, he would be awake and listening to me. So I read many manuscripts to that cat. Yeah. Well, the language is so important to me, and I have to hear it out loud. So sometimes I'll have my husband read parts to me just to, hear it from somebody else's voice. But yeah, reading a lot is a big part of the process.
Is that tie into your work in playwriting then too?
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a lot of dialogue in my books, and dialogue is my absolute favorite thing to write. And so it's not a surprise that I transitioned into playwriting fairly late in my career, but I've really loved it. I've had 3 full-length plays now, and it's been very gratifying.
Are any adapted from your fictional works, or are they
The
all?
first one is called Papermaker, and it was adapted from my book Ernie's Ark. So
Okay.
it follows a paper mill strike in a small town. You kind of follow 2 families through this. That's the chronology of the story. And I felt that I was never quite done with these characters, so I pulled 2 of them out and put them in a play.
And Abbott's Falls is Ernie's Ark takes place there, and that's
Yes.
also where I haven't read all your books. Like
No, Abbott Falls appears only in this one and in Ernie's Ark.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yes, and in the play, it's also Abbott Falls. Yeah, and my husband's last name is Abbott, which is why.
He's got his own falls now.
Yes.
That's
well, I did it originally so my in-laws would get a kick out of it, which they did. Yeah.
Was Harriet's name changed from Shirley? I would kept thinking of Harriet the Spy.
Oh no, I didn't think of that at all.
Okay.
I don't know. I almost never. Characters come named, and I hardly ever change the names, but I don't know. I think it was because I had several sentences where 3 syllables were a better beat. You know, it was a rhythm thing, I think, which is why I ended up changing Shirley to 2 syllables to 3 syllables. That's how closely I kind of parse my sentences. That's why it takes me 4 years to write a book.
Sometimes less. But then you can actually, if you include the the parrot research, it is actually a little longer. So you're just like,
yes, that's true.
One of the things that Lisa and I noticed in the book is, and it's oh my God, how clever of me. But you play a lot with people's assumptions about other people.
Mm-hmm.
I assume that's something you've always, I think that feels like it came through in some of your other work as well. Mm-hmm. But it is, just like while you read this book, one of the things is like, you think you know the story, you don't know the story. Mm-hmm. I'd love for you to talk about that a little.
Well, part of that comes with how I write, which is without an outline or anything. So when I'm writing a first draft, I'm writing the same way the eventual reader will read it. I want to know what happens. So there is that kind of built-in suspense just in the process that I use for writing. But I also, I really like, there's a lot of books I read. I mean, I consider myself in the literary fiction genre, and I read a lot of that. I read kind of everything, but so many times I just figure, what this book really needs is a plot. And, people love plots. I mean, we want story. I mean, is it too much to ask for, a setup, a complication, rising action, climax, and denouement? Is that really so much to ask? It's not that hard. And so the books that I find the most memorable are the ones that not only have beautiful writing and characters that I care about, but those 2 things are put into a really page turning. You want to know what happens to these people. And I think that's why we read. We want to know what happens next. 2 of the greatest words that anybody can walk into a room with is guess what? Immediately, but it's like, what? You want to know what the next thing is. And that's just basic, story writing. So for me, plot is extremely important. But equally important is to create characters who feel real. And I think that's part of why I put them to work. You see them in a different environments, not just, talking over a cup of coffee or thinking endlessly about their life, but when you put people in a situation where they're interacting with other people, that's where you get, that's where you hook your readers. They want to know a little more about that person. And I have to say that one of the best compliments I ever got on my writing was from my sister, Kathy, And she says, you know what, Mon, she calls me Mon. She goes, you know what, Mon? None of your characters, even the minor ones, are just one thing. And that, I think, is the essence of creating character. No one is one thing. In fact, Harriet says to her charges that the human person is on a continuum. We're neither the worst thing nor the best thing we've ever done. We're all the selves we ever were, still contained in this, I contain multitudes. And, even if you don't get over something, you figure out a way to stand beside it, because it's not, that thing is never going to go away. It's always part of what your human experience is. And I believe so deeply in that. And that's where forgiveness comes from, is to understand that the human soul, the human experience exists on a continuum. And over here is the worst, and over there is the best, and everything in between. We are composed of all of those things.
Fellow creatures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's, I've said this before in answer to a question, but I think I'm just saying this as a writer to my readers, that I think people underestimate what a challenge it is to write about decency. Because decency is not inherently suspenseful. Decency is not inherently plotty. Evil is suspenseful and plotty. But writing about decency, you really need, you need some skill to do that. It's not easy to do.
Lisa, do you have another question? Because otherwise I'm just going to ask about the main stuff. So
well, I know, but this is such a good place to go into the main stuff, because you just hit all those points.
Yeah.
Where that
your books are also, it's just very placey too.
Yeah.
And, sense of place is very important to me. I'm trying to think if I've ever written anything not set. I have written things not set in Maine, but I feel like if I were going to write a whole novel set in Milwaukee, I would have to go live there for at least 2 years. I just feel like I have to really, really, really know a place before writing about it. And I know Maine really, really well, because I've lived here, except for college. I've lived here my whole life, and seen a lot of changes, a lot of people come and go, a lot of people coming in now, because Maine is like all of a sudden de trop.
Yeah.
And in Portland especially, it's a very hip city now. And when
you guys won 2 James Beard Awards.
Oh, that happens every year. It's like nothing now. Like James Beard schmeared. Tell me something new. No, it's crazy.
It is like, I have to tell you, when I was moving, I grew up in New York, and I wound up moving to a place, and I honestly, in my head, Portland, Maine and Milwaukee were about the same size. And I'm like, it was like, at the time, it was probably 40,000 or 50,000. Milwaukee was like 800,000. But in my head, the mystique of Portland was very strong. I mean, partly because we went to Maine on vacation periodically. And my friend, one of my college friends, had some connections to Maine too. So
I have never met anyone who had a negative association with Maine. If you're on vacation here, you're having a great time. If you've just passed through, somebody was friendly to you. It's a really nice place.
Well, don't tell everybody.
Oh, it's too late. It's way too late for that. Yeah.
Oh no, you don't know how crowded things can get. It's just nothing.
Yeah.
But I went on the website for, is it pronounced Rennie's, or is it?
Oh, Rennie's a Maine adventure. Yeah. That's our chain store. Yeah.
I love that you get your own. All our local things, they're pretty much all gone. And then I went to look at Gifford's ice cream.
Oh, the best. They win the chocolate ice cream contest every year.
Oh yeah.
Like nationally. Best chocolate ice cream ever. I have a Gifford's right down the street from my house. It's a little
Yes, no, I was kind of there was some mouth watering involved.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Rennie's is big. There's nobody in Maine who has not shopped at Rennie's at least once. And you can get everything from, you know, a can of soup to hiking boots.
It's so interesting that I was just listening to a Chicago station complaining about, when something's popular in Chicago, they want to open, 100 of them around the country. And it's so interesting because they haven't gone, they still both have Maine in their taglines. And it's not that far to New Hampshire.
No, it's not. I know, it is funny, isn't it?
So it's like a little psychological barrier, you think, around this.
Yeah, I think so.
Keep it up.
Yeah. Well, to try.
Lisa, do you have a last question, you think?
No, should we ask about books recommendations?
In addition to all the ones in the book.
Okay, so
in addition to the ones in the book.
I keep a book journal because people ask me this all the time and my brain is like a colander. I can't remember what I read last week. So I'm going to just look through and, okay. So yesterday in the hammock, I read Mycroft and Sherlock by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Thank you very much. Who's one of my heroes. And it's one of the new Sherlock Holmes stories. There's a whole genre of neo. And this is when,
hooray for public domain,
Yeah, but oh my goodness, it's so well written. It's really, I love Arthur Conan Doyle, and it's like it's finding a brand new one, except they're young. Sherlock is only 18 in this, and Mycroft is his older brother who's trying to keep him on the straight and narrow. It's so good, and it's a mystery. And what I also just read that I adored is Judi Dench's memoir called Shakespeare, the Man Who Pays the Rent. Do you know this book?
Yeah, we're selling it. We're both fairly.
Oh my God. You have to put it in your window right now. It is so delightful. If you like theater, if you like Shakespeare, if you like Judi Dench, she's 89 years old. She's played every Shakespeare character you can imagine. And it's set up as an interview. So it's somebody that she's worked with before, a younger guy, but I think he was either he directed her or acted with her or both. And she is the most delightful raconteur. It's so wonderful. And she deconstructs these scenes, like why Lady Macbeth is doing that. And I just ate it right up. So that I loved. And I'll give you one more. I'm kind of into short stories lately, and there's two. One is Table for Two by Amor Towles, which I absolutely loved. And then this one I'm reading right now, which is Andrea Barrett, Natural History. She's one of my favorite writers, and I love the way she has a science background, obvious. She must. There's no way she doesn't. And I just love how she brings science, and a lot of them are in the 19th century when science, they're just learning things that we know now take for granted. But she's just a beautiful writer, and they're wonderful stories that if you've read like Ship Fever and Servants of the Map and some of her other ones, some of those characters are in these stories, which is always a delight to see somebody you remember from long ago showing up again. So those are my recommendations at the moment.
I have a short story book for you. Ben Shattuck's got a new one coming out called The History of Sound.
The History of Sound.
And it takes place in New England. It's wonderful. That first story is fantastic.
And what's the name? What's his name?
Shattuck.
Ben Shattuck, yeah. Oh, when is that out now or coming out? I'll look it up.
It's coming out in July. So it may actually be out today or next Tuesday.
You know, another short story writer I discovered last year. She's only got 2 books. I love them so much. Her name is Danielle. Danielle, I think Evans, maybe.
Yeah.
They're called, one is called Before You Suffocate Your Own Fool Self, and the other is called The Department of Historical Corrections.
Yes.
They are among the most humane short stories I've ever read. She's a deeply humane writer. I love her, and I can't wait for another book to come out.
I'm in a short story group, and we meet every other week, and we just talk about one short story for about an hour. And we talked
Wow.
about one of her stories. It was
Oh.
fantastic. It's a great, anyone who's watching this, I suggest a short story group.
Wow, I love that because you don't have to read a lot.
Yeah,
And yeah, that's fantastic.
it's good.
Great. I never even thought of that. I love that.
Yeah.
Good. Wow, you guys are great. Thank you so much for
Oh.
inviting me.
We're
It's your
thrilled. You're also
virtual
great.
world.
Yes, this has been wonderful. We could keep talking.
I know, I feel like we could go all day here.
Yeah.
But we cannot, alas.
That's right.
So yeah.
Well, thank you for everything. We will have this posted soon, and
Thank you.
and we will be recommending your book all year. So
Thank you. And thanks to you, and thank you to your readers and your patrons. I really appreciate all of you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Daniel.
oh, thanks, Lisa. Take care. Everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.